My name's Rudi Yardley. Firstly, want to say thank you to Vienna.JS for letting me chat to you guys tonight. Had some really interesting talks tonight. I thought Roland's last little talk was actually quite anarchistic and quite exciting, actually. I really like that. And Julian's take on editors is really different to what I've seen before, so that was really cool. I'm from Melbourne, Australia. I'm kind of on a working sabbatical at the moment, just trying to play around with some open source ideas and just sort of have fun in code instead of just kind of working for the man all the time. So that's what I'm doing here. And today I want to talk about this. So does anyone like doing this? Can you guys see all that? So we've got x does not equal null and x does not equal undefined. Anyone like having to do that all the time? You like, we've got one guy here who likes it. Anyone refuse to do this? Right, exactly. I'm going to get to that in a minute. Yep.
There's a proposal for this, right?
There is too. Yeah, that's true. But what is this? This thing we've got here. X doesn't equal null. X doesn't equal undefined. Anyone know a name for it? Null check. What? It's an equality. It's a language construct. What sort of language construct is it? No. It's an expression, right? So it's an expression. More specifically, it's a predicate expression. And so an expression is basically anything that resolves to true or false. And a predicate expression is states, affirms, or asserts something about a subject. And in this case, our subject is x. We'd use it like this. So in an if statement, you could put the predicate expression. My if is completely invisible because of the contrast here, I'm sorry. But that says if x doesn't equal null and then do something. And so the idea here is that basically we're checking to see if we can compute with x. But I'm pretty lazy, as a lot of developers are, and I tend to do this all the time. So I'm just like, if x, do something with that x. But what if x is 0? What if it's false? What if it's an empty string? Well, then it's not really going to work. And so it's not really correct anymore. So we've got this correct thing where we're checking against like a nil check, right? We're checking against if we can compute with x versus just checking if it's truthy, right? Which is a JavaScript trick, you know, where it just checks to see if it's, you know, if it coalesces to true or false. So, but why do we do this? Why do we decide to just check x and not do the proper thing? Well, I would say that the good reason for this is that basically predicates in JavaScript are just not concise enough. So when I go if x, it's a lot less effort on the keyboard in my head than going if x doesn't equal null and x doesn't equal undefined. So being concise it's important because it makes things more correct. Now, over here, that invisible word there says type of, by the way. But yeah, so this is another example of a predicate expression. Here we're checking our input, seeing if its username is a string, and checking out a whole lot of stuff about it. Is this concise? I don't know about that. But there are solutions, right? So one of the solutions that we could use would be to turn it into a predicate function, like this gentleman over here suggested before, which would mean that basically we get to tokenize that huge long predicate into something that makes more sense to us. So here we're taking, this is a function that takes, so there's a type, by the way, before that, this is TypeScript. Type predicate function equals x, and it returns x, which is any, and it returns a boolean. All right, and so this is how we'd use it. We'd go, okay, we've got const is not nil equals then x, returns x, like basically returns the predicate. And so that means that anywhere in our code we can then use is not nil as a function to check that that's the thing that we expect out of x is the thing that we want. And so then we have like, here's a complex predicate function. Again, excuse for the red, but basically we've got const is user, its function takes input, and then we're returning input and type of input is username, blah, 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 blah. So that's complex predicate function. But I would say that, like, if we look at this, there's some issues here, right? And I'd say that complex predicate function is hard to understand the intent when you look at it like that. There's so much stuff going on there. It's quite complicated. You can't understand it immediately, which is a problem. And it's mainly not concise due to the way that JavaScript works. And as a result, it needs to be well tested. So when you have these things that are checking if a user is valid, or if an object has the correct sort of structure that you need, you need to usually put those in a test. So I was asking myself, well, can we do better? And I was thinking, well, let's just boil this down a little bit, right? So what's the essential information here? We've got, so here's a predicate function without the name there. So it's just x, it takes in an x and it checks if it's null or if not null or not undefined. Well, we can get rid of x. So because we're dealing with predicates, we know that there's going to be a subject there. And as a result, we can just say, well, we know it's a subject that we're looking at, so we can get rid of that. We can also get rid of the equality component of it, because we're checking x against a thing. So then we have not null and not undefined. And if we do a bit of Boolean algebra, we can pull out the not and then make it not null or undefined. And then because we're in La La Land and we're using our imagination and everything, we can actually just use a single pipe instead of a valid JavaScript not. Oh, sorry, or. And wouldn't it be nice, and here this says const again, so wouldn't it be nice if we could just go, okay, well here's that little like main information about this predicate, and give me a function that's going to test that. And it turns out that there is now. There's a little library that I've been working on. So PDSL is an open source project that I'm working on at the moment. And basically PDSL allows you to do exactly that. So this says import p from PDSL, const not nil equals p, and then passing into p we pass a template string. And I call that template string a p expression. And what that's going to do, it's going to provide kind of the minimum amount of information you need in order to define what the predicate is that you want. And then down bottom, that's just calling that function. So here's another example. So what we're doing here is we're checking to see if our object has got a name property on it. So you can see the template string is the main thing to look for here. So you can see that that's just basically, it looks like an object with name in there. And here's a slightly more complex example where we're checking for a name, checking that the age is greater than 16, and we're checking the occupation can be either engineer, designer, or project manager. So, and that really big, ghastly predicate expression before, that sort of boils down to this. So here we can, you've got full white space, you can muck around with it. So we can sort of separate things out so that they make a bit more sense. And so I think, to me, that's a lot more readable than what we had before. One other thing I think is quite a killer feature of PDSL is that it's composable. So you can create small predicates and then incorporate them into larger predicates. So there we got, here we've got a valid username predicate, valid password predicate, and then isValidUser uses both of those in order to just check the types of the properties that it has. As well as that, we're TypeScript compatible, so we can take TypeScript types, pass them into, this is all within TypeScript, pass them into where we call our P function, and then that turns the resulting predicate into a guard statement. So, a guard function. So you can use that guard function, and then TypeScript's going to know that once you've used that, that you have the particular type you've specified. We've got primitive matching. So here we're checking against number, boolean, string, symbol, and array. And you can pass in stuff into that. So you can pass in any sort of JavaScript primitive you want. So you could pass in the actual JavaScript primitive inside the template literal and do that there. We've got range comparison. So here is teenager is just checking to see if the numbers between and including 13 to 19. We've got Boolean operators. So this will return true if the input object is either has a success message string in it, or it has an error code, which is a number, and a message, which is a string. Reference equality, we can check for empty stuff, so you can use arrays or objects or undefined null. We can check to see if an array contains a value. So, so here we've got, we're checking to see if this array contains 7 and the string foo. And so basically, if we look, when we boil this down, the way that PDSL works is it uses a bunch of helper functions, and PDSL actually provides those helper functions to the developer to use to compose your own if you needed, or if you needed to if you just wanted to use the functions by themselves, they're there, so you can use them. That's a more detailed list of the ones that I've been able to put together so far. And I've also written a Babel plugin for it, so that makes PDSL quite fast because you can add that to your Babel config, and it's going to mean that all of your P expressions will then be compiled into just function calls, so that they're actually quite fast. They're not going to be a performance penalty of having to go through, pass the string, work out what's what the shape of the object is that you're looking for and whatever. So it's just going to be a bunch of function calls in your final build. So it is a little bit experimental still. I'm sure there are a couple of bugs in that only sort of popped the other day, and I haven't had a lot of time to work on it lately. So, but I plan to go back and fix a couple of the bugs. So the syntax, it's influenced by JavaScript, TypeScript, Flow, style components, as you can see with the template literals, and Ruby, and also by you. So I'm hoping that by coming and talking about this, maybe you'd be interested in coming to check out the repository and provide some feedback and let me know what you don't like about it, what you like about it. That'd be really cool. Yeah, I'd love your input. So PDSL is young. Just started it a couple of months ago. I was hacking on it at a JS camp in Barcelona the other day. And so I still need to do syntax highlighting. Unfortunately, we haven't got that happening yet. So within the P expression, it's still just a template string. But actually, if someone knows how to do that, I'd love to hear from you. If anyone's done any syntax highlighting, like VS Code syntax highlighting, I'd really like to talk to you about that. Not all the syntax is defined. There are still open areas that we're looking at. A big one is that I've been working on this with another guy, and we've been talking about moving to exact matching by default. At the moment it's not, it says loose matching at the moment, but exact matching is actually going to make it a lot better because you're going to be able to be much more precise with your P expressions, and it adds a bunch of other good features to it too. And lastly, I've been looking at validation errors so that we can create a different type of process that will, instead of spitting out true or false, it's going to give you an array of errors. So you can specify the errors within the P expression, and then you'll be able to use it to do things like validate form objects and that sort of stuff. So this is a little sneak preview. So that's the exact matching. So it's a little bit small, but yeah, and validation of errors is going to look like that. At the moment, that could change, so we're not sure yet. So I'd appreciate it if you can follow PDSL on GitHub if you feel so inclined. Any input, any issues, any PRs, any stars are all things that are going to make me love you. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm not sure how much more time I've got or if I'm... Yeah, so... Yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to talk about it. It works. It works, yeah.